This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Do you like sport? Do you enjoy kick of the ball, run fast, punch hard? Yeah, me neither. No, in all honesty, you probably do enjoy sports in one form or another. Personally, I'm a big fan of, I don't know, cornhole? But there's no denying that sports of some kind are something that most people have always enjoyed through all of human history, and during the Victorian era, athletics became the center stage for a big part of the women's rights movement. Many of us have grown up with this image in our heads of the quiet and demure Victorian woman, too tightly corseted and repressed to do anything but sit around and faint or drink tea or something. But that wasn't the case at all. In fact, the late 1800s saw a sports craze unlike ever before, spurred by the Industrial Revolutions allowing the mass manufacture and therefore sudden accessibility of sports goods and equipment. And the ladies wanted in on it. From croquet to tennis to fencing and cycling, the years before and after the turn of the century revolutionized women's roles in society, both in and out of the home, in what they did and wore, as well as how they saw themselves. Many women rode their way into the 1900s on a pair of wheels or swinging a foil. Come learn about it with me. But first, let's hear a word from today's returning sponsor, Squarespace. As you may by now know, I've been working on redoing my portfolio site, which is easily one of the most important things for an artist to have, and thankfully I've saved a lot of time and stress by using Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business or showcase your work. They have an enormous amount of beautiful and easy to customize templates to suit your needs, whether you're presenting your projects like me or trying to sell your wares online. It takes very little time to whip up a gorgeous looking site, and you don't even need to know anything about coding or web design. Plus, Squarespace automatically reformats your site for mobile, and every site needs to be mobile compatible these days. Head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/CazRow to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain using my code CazRow. Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to learning about the trials and tribulations of Victorian women in sports. There's no question that Victorian women were born into a world with extremely specific social expectations for them based on a number of factors, class in particular. But in general, no matter who you were, it was expected that a woman must be the angel of the home. She holds her family together by providing the perfect moral guidance, being an ideal mother, being soft and conventionally beautiful and kind and devoutly religious. From the mother, children learn society's rules and barriers, how labor is gendered, how they're supposed to act and expect other people to act, who they're supposed to be for the supposed greater good of society. In many ways, the Victorians believed these rules were what held civilization together and made everything run like a well-oiled machine. But we know that this absolutely was not the case all the time. These rules, which benefited the upper and middle classes the most, couldn't possibly apply to working class families who had to rely on the wages of working women and mothers. It applied less to marginalized groups such as queer folks, people of color, and non-Christians who found themselves inherently othered by society's expectations for who is good and pure, who deserves a place in society in the sunlight. It was assumed at large that there was a natural order of things and that all differences between men and women were not taught or learned socially, but biological truths. Of course, we know how false this is. Gender is extremely complicated, and biological sex itself isn't even binary either. Our lives and bodies are so much more complicated than we ever thought before, and that's a beautiful thing to be acknowledged and celebrated. But this is the late 1800s, and we're not quite there yet. So, before we continue, I just want to note that much of the discussion in this video uses ciscentric language because that's the context that we're dealing with. We'll also be focusing specifically on the US today, and side note, because of this, I know using the word Victorian isn't quite accurate in this case because it really should only apply to people who were under Queen Victoria's rule, but the word has become synonymous with the era at this point, so I find it useful as a category. Also, as per usual, this video will not cover every single aspect of this subject. The video would go on forever. So, we'll be doing an overview and then looking a bit deeper into two sports in particular, fencing and cycling. So let's get into it. As I said, behaving in a ladylike manner was a deeply embedded part of daily life for women in this era, no matter what your social status was, and this expectation followed through during the rise of female sportsmanship. Jennifer Hargreaves writes in The Victorian Cult of the Family and the Early Years of Female Sport, the increasing specialization of labor created a multitude of new jobs for working-class women. At the same time, however, it narrowed the lives of middle-class women and robbed them of their economic usefulness. The idleness of the bourgeois lady became symbolic of the husband's or her father's material success. Her finery reflected his affluence, and the way she organized her leisure defined his social standing. Essentially, the ability for a woman to do as little as possible comfortably and prettily could represent her class. She could busy herself with little things like needlepoint or polite social engagements, maybe even a game of croquet or tennis, but seeing a woman of affluence doing manual labor, mothering her own children, or being particularly active was a visual affront to bourgeois ideals. After all, isn't that what servants are for? But as the middle class grew, people started noticing just how unhealthy women there were becoming, both physically and mentally. Any anxiety or stress had the potential to be diagnosed as hysteria, which could land a woman with any number of terrible quack cures, often compelling her to take bed rest for as long as 6 weeks for no reason, or to take on a malnourishing diet of plain broths, eggs, and mineral waters. And in the early Victorian era, people were quickly developing a grave distrust of medical men in general, while simultaneously somehow believing most of the ideas that many doctors promoted. As discussed in my video on Victorian medicine, the treatments you could expect from a doctor in a hospital were often either useless or bloody and brutal. Even among those men who attended medical school, the education could often be spotty at best and straight up ignorant to scientific knowledge at worst. It wasn't until later, when women began engaging a bit more in casual sports, that people noticed their improving health of body and mind, and were forced to accept the fact that maybe it's a good thing for women to be active. One male doctor named S. Weir Mitchell wrote, "To run, to climb, to swim, to ride, to play violent games ought to be as natural to the girl as to the boy." Many people take this as an opportunity to bring women's fashion into the picture, citing their clothes as constrictive and oppressive. There's some truth to this, but non-truths as well, and we have to look at the nuance here. I know from personal experience that wearing a corset is not necessarily constrictive of movement. Most women, even in the upper classes, didn't tight lace, and often if they did, it was for special occasions. I mean, rich people do this today too, you know. Celebrities wear tight shapewear on the red carpet or to be on camera. And let's face it, whether or not you agree with plastic surgery, you have to admit that operations like the BBL to permanently alter your actual body at risk of death are decidedly more extreme than a few hours of wearing a tight corset for a party is. If you decide to have work done, that's absolutely your choice, and I respect that. But let's not pretend that we're any better today than our Victorian ancestors were when it comes to chasing the ideal body type. At least they could put on the ideal body in the morning and take it off at night. Nevertheless, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that these clothes were completely unrestrictive either. Women went about their daily lives in these clothes every single day. They were used to wearing and moving in them, and we aren't. So it's obviously harder for us to wear these types of clothes today, and it may feel more like a cage. But the plethora of long skirts and petticoats did make it difficult for women to do certain activities, such as sports. You obviously couldn't do a lot of really exaggerated athletics, so especially in the beginning of the rise of women's sports, the sports they chose were things that could easily be done in the clothes that they already wore. And by the 1800s, women were already so enamored with sports that they were beginning to alter their clothes to suit movement better, like using aprons to tie back their skirts for tennis. This came during the congruent rise of the rational dress movement, which sought to advocate for women's dress reform to allow women to dress more comfortably and freely, and more hygienically. Before the bicycle craze and the rise of the automobile led to the widespread paving of roads, most roads were dirt or cobblestone. The only vehicles around were those involving horses, which of course meant that there was horse poop around. This, combined with food left on the ground, bugs, mud, puddles, and other human rubbish, The street was a pretty dirty place to be in general, so if you're wearing long skirts that sweep along the ground, you're inevitably going to pick up this muck and carry it with you into the home. Not to mention put up with how waterlogged they got in the rain. The rational dress movement sought more sensible ways of dressing, which still looked good and were healthy to wear, and the effects of the movement carried over into the women's sportswear revolution that was beginning to get fired up. The last few decades of the 1800s saw the stark rise in women's education. Girls who had the money were often sent to girls' schools to learn humanities, English, math, homemaking skills, manner, and more increasingly physical education. Schoolgirls had regular gym classes where they did various sports such as basketball, swimming, tennis, and skating, as well as stretches and basic calisthenics. And due to the relative freedom of dress for young girls compared to women, they were allowed to wear gym suits. Often these suits had shorter skirts with bloomers underneath, and over time they often forewent the skirt and used bloomers exclusively, following the coattails of the very, very short-lived bloomerism movement in the 1850s, named after Amelia Bloomer, when feminist women made an attempt to popularize bloomers as a staple of women's fashion. After a lot of backlash and the realization that their feminist message was being lost in the frenzy surrounding their clothing, the movement was unsuccessful and bloomerism died out. But like all great ideas, it came back later with a vengeance in the world of women's activewear. As it slowly became more accessible for women to play various sports, it came with rules as to what was okay for them to be wearing, and this was especially so during regulated sports where races, games, or tournaments were involved. In tennis, women were still required to wear full-length skirts, but over time the players were allowed to make them shorter or roll up their sleeves. Corset manufacturers began producing athletic corsets that were shorter, corded instead of boned, ventilated, or easier to take on and off, while still providing good bust and back support, because yes, people with boobs need that. But in the realm of girls' schools and colleges was where the most rapid advancement in women's sportswear happened, unrestricted by the traditional rules of male-dominated sports leagues and associations, in part because people cared much less what women decided to wear when there were no men watching. School and college girls were altering their own clothing, especially after the rise of the at-home sewing machine, and stealing clothes from their brothers, blurring the lines even more between masculine and feminine clothing. Women's sportswear at large wasn't necessarily tied to borrowing from or mimicking men's fashion, but it did bring in some elements. This didn't stop sportswear from being at least a little bit influenced, though, by the Victorian fears and anxieties surrounding sex. You'll notice that in many aspects until the 1910s, women's sportswear often took on a more flowy and more shapeless appearance over time. Though this may have been more comfortable in many ways, it also served to disguise the body's shape from view as women became more and more physically active. Check out my video about the myth of the sexy Victorian ankle to learn more about this, but Victorians had a lot of anxieties surrounding female sexuality in general. It was thought by the late 1880s that cold baths and exercise were an antidote to women's sexual desires, which was considered, well, I'll let the 1912 Handbook for Girl Guides explain itself. All secret habits are evil and dangerous, lead to hysteria and lunatic asylums, and serious illness is the result. Evil practices dare not face an honest person. They lead you on to blindness, paralysis, and loss of memory. Evil practices and secret habits being, you know. The fact that these wild claims were written as late as 1912 shows just how pervasive these beliefs were. At the same time, these women clearly had to think about having sex at some point because many exercises in schools were done with motherhood in mind, exercising to prepare the body for healthy pregnancy. Ew. So yeah, women can do a sport, women can move, women can do activity, but only in an unsexy but still ladylike and pretty way. We can't let men know that you have a torso and limbs under there. Oh no, you have to be an amoebus blob of undefined energy, like a ghost. Sorry ladies, this is the ideal body type whether you like it or not. This is the ideal female form. Conversely, a number of historically black colleges and universities decided to go their own directions from the rest of the university world's rules on women's sports, mostly because they were typically ignored by white university systems. They often got inadequate funding and weren't permitted access to the same resources and events if they were given any access at all. But one thing was their ability to develop their own rules and programs that allowed these HBCUs to create some of the most successful and advanced women's athletic programs of the era. For example, the Tiger Bells track and field program at Tennessee State University won the Amateur Athletic Union competitions every year from 1956 through 1968, and TSU ladies won 25 of the 40 track and field medals awarded to women at the Olympics between 1948 and 1968. But these cases were few and far between because even at HBCUs, black women had an extremely difficult time finding athletic opportunities in the first place. Women's sports were largely ignored, and so black women interested in sports had to seek out chances to hone their skills outside of school. One of these places was the YWCA or the YMCA, which offered black women chances to do gymnastics, hockey, basketball, and tennis. Since they were barred from competing with the U.S. Lawn Tennis Association, black tennis players began to create their own arenas to compete, such as the American Tennis Association in 1916, which catered to promoting tennis to black players, old and young. In 1917, Lucy Diggs Slowe won the women's singles crown at the ATA's first tournament, making her the first black American female sports champion. But in general, many women straight up just didn't give a shit about social convention when it came to sports. And outside of the ever-famous cycling suits of the latter decades in the Edwardian era, which we'll get to later, some of the most visually striking women's sportswear could be found in the realm of fencing. Do you like this outfit that I sewed in 2 days? It's bloomers. So another reason why people were so scared of women doing sports, and especially competitive ones, is because they feared that it would make women aggressive. You can't have an angry macho angel of the house, can you? This stemmed in part from the perception that sports made men aggressive and hypermasculine, which was all fine and dandy for men, of course. For men, it was perceived that sports-related aggression was a sign of vitality and patriotism. If women start acting aggressive, though, well, are you really a woman? In the Victorian era, it was supremely easy for anyone to just slip and fall out of gender. Because so much of gender was wrapped up in what you wore and how you acted, it was especially concerning for people to imagine women wearing mannish clothes and acting more masculine by the standards of the era. So for men, sports were a good way to reinforce and reassert their masculinity in a way that encouraged camaraderie with other men. For women, it would be shirking the frailty and delicateness that nature gave them. Oh no. But, and you might need to sit down for this one, women are human beings with the exact same emotions as anyone else. It was not an infrequent thing for working class women to strip down to the waist and start beating the shit out of each other during bar fights. So yeah, maybe sports would be useful to help curb some of that aggression and anger like the lads do. Lord knows women had enough reasons to be pissed off. And honestly, what better way to get out the aggression and anger that you have than with some classic sword dueling. Dueling with swords is an activity almost as old as time, and the late Victorian era saw a big jump in interest in fencing from middle and upper class women. Before the Regency era, fencing was typically known only as dueling, and duels usually happened as a challenge or to settle a disagreement or rivalry. You weren't gonna duel unless a genuine insult happened. In the early 1800s, though, upper class gentlemen began to apply regulated rules to dueling that transformed it into a sport for fun and health. The outfit that I'm wearing today is based on a number of different fencing garments that women would wear. Most obviously, it's based on the painting L'Escremeuse by French Impressionist painter Jean Béraud, who painted it using the Parisian fencer Marguerite de Sylvia as a model around the turn of the century. Many people think that this painting is supposed to be of the incredible 17th century bisexual fencer and opera singer Julie d'Aubigny, but that's not the case. I'm not actually sure how that idea came about, but it looks like it was probably a classic case of internet telephone. Julie d'Aubigny lived over 200 years before Béraud painted this in the 1890s, and from what evidence we do have, he painted the portrait of Margarita in part because of her striking fencing outfit. Margarita Sylvia was a singer and actress studying fencing in Paris at the time, and her outfit from this painting became so popular that it became synonymous with fencing women. Florenz Ziegfeld even purchased a number of copies of the costume for his shows on Broadway, and as one photo of actress Blanche Macready in the costume in the same pose exploded in popularity, along with the costume itself, the mythos and romantic image of the Lady Fencer exploded too, and with good reason. It looks extremely cool. The Lady Fencer, as almost a character based on the painting, became a widespread staple in more of Béraud's paintings, as well as other cartoons, poems, songs, and illustrations. The fencing girl with the little red heart had a grip on popular culture until well into the late 40s. But it's hard to say how many fencing women wore this particular outfit. Its popularity leads us to believe that many probably did, but there were also a lot of other options out there too. You had the classic white padded jacket, bloomers, a wide variety of shoes. Some women even settled for fencing in baggy shirts. If you're wearing a corset underneath, it really doesn't hurt too much to get poked. The 1902 Ladies' Realm magazine described a London ladies' fencing club uniform like so. The club uniform consists of a short silk-lined black alpaca skirt with the regulation brass-buttoned white linen fencing coat. The skirts are cut somewhat after the fashion of the cycling skirt, and most of the members wear black or white shoes. The stockings are either of silk or wool. The silken hose is distinctly to be recommended for daintiness and finish. A white glove with a black or scarlet gauntlet is drawn over the right hand. One very skillful and graceful woman fencer deprecates, as does Lady Colin Campbell, the wearing of a skirt. She is assured by long practice that full knickerbockers of black satin or vicuna allow unfettered and more graceful play for the limbs. Extremely practical, of course, but that didn't stop the upper-class ladies who took fencing classes from using the gym as a fashion show, because honestly every other arena of their lives was, so why would this be any different? Wealthy women would hire fashion designers to create for them brightly colored and lavish silken fencing garments, which drew much ire from other fencers. It quickly became a taboo in the fencing world to wear frilly and fussy blouses, as they would routinely rip and get caught on the fencing foil. As most things related to class went, fencing was a sport gatekept both by classism and the price of participation. Working class folks could rarely, if ever, afford to join fencing. This was the case with many sports until well into the 20th century, and even among those who could afford it, fencing for women was hardly taken seriously. It was considered a sport that wealthy women would do to busy themselves for fun. Sure, it was for fun, but most of these women found very close communities with each other, and many of them became just as talented as the men, but they were scarcely permitted to compete. That didn't stop a number of them from gaining notoriety for their skills, one of them being May Tupi Lowther, a tennis champion and fencing icon. She began fencing at age 15 and refused to fence in skirts, opting instead for something as close to the male uniform as possible. Lowther was a lesbian and ran a popular lesbian salon in the 20s. She was known as perhaps the most clever among the younger generation of lady fencers, who may justly be termed the champion swordswomen of the kingdom, as stated by Harmsworth magazine in 1899. Another commentator wrote, "Fencing is not an art for namby-pamby girls, or indeed for any girl who does not command more than the average amount of spirit and pluck, and Miss Lowther is above all a woman of indomitable nerve." Later on, Lowther was close friends with the writer Radcliffe Hall and Hall's partner Una Troubridge, but they had a falling out after Lowther believed that she was used as the inspiration for the tragic character Stephen Gordon in Hall's infamous 1920s lesbian/trans novel, The Well of Loneliness. A good book for a historical LGBTQ read, by the way, but I have to warn you, the ending is deeply upsetting. Because of the controversy surrounding the book, Lowther leaned into a more straight image and tried to dress more socially acceptable until things blew over, but eventually returned to wearing menswear in later years. Dressing like a heterosexual was too much for the already strained relationship with Hall and Troubridge, and the friendship ended bitterly, as Lowther was viewed as betraying her own ilk. Diana Sohami wrote, "New friends replaced the old. Tupi Lothar fell from grace for claiming to be the inspiration for the Well of Loneliness. One funny story involved Lothar getting stopped by officers driving across the French-Italian border for masquerading as a woman, and then stopped again driving back for masquerading as a man. Regardless, Lothar's notoriety for being a lesbian couldn't dampen any of the fencing accomplishments, and thankfully Lothar is still known today as one of the most famous late Victorian fencers. But no matter how much skill they had, Victorian women suffered from constantly hitting barriers in the fencing world, just as they did with every other organized sport. Hell, in basketball, women were made to play a completely altered, slower version of the game to protect them from overexerting themselves. Women were first allowed to compete in Olympic fencing in 1924, but were restricted from the apparently more advanced weapons that were the épée and saber. Women were constrained to only competing Olympically with the foil until 1996, when épée events opened, and in 2000, when saber events were finally added too. The year 2000. Seriously. But thankfully, non-organized sports had very little barrier for entry, leaving much more room for women of all backgrounds to participate, and this is where the bicycle craze comes in. The bicycle's early years were not easy for women. Because the bike's early incarnations were meant to be a mechanical imitation of a horse, this followed through in its use for women in that many early women's bikes were designed to be ridden side saddle, like women would do with a horse. This not only made them difficult to maneuver, but also off balance. Another option for women was the newly invented tricycles that came onto the scene in the 1870s, which allowed them to front pedal in long skirts. There were also tandem bikes, which were more popular as a way for couples to have a romantic outing, such as these side-by-side styles, or this Crescent number 25 combination tandem. But bikes didn't find a truly successful style for women until 1888, when the drop frame style was invented by the husband of Mrs. W.E. Smith in Washington, D.C. The lower middle bar allowed women to mount the bike in their skirts, and later on, voluminous bloomers. Bloomers for bikes were gaining traction as early as the 1860s, as mentioned in papers like this article from the Brooklyn Eagle in 1869. In a short time, as soon as the arrangements are complete, Mr. H.B. Whitty will open a ladies' velocipede riding school. The room will be in his building in Nevin Street, where he has a fine large room to which there will be an entrance entirely distinct from the other entrance. Miss Carrie Moore, the skater and who is also a fine rider of the velocipede, will have charge of the room and will act as instructress. Garments of the bloomer pattern will be kept on hand for those who wish to ride. No gentlemen will be admitted to the room, so the sensitive and bashful ladies need not be afraid of intrusion. But just as we saw before with sports at large, women on wheels had a great deal of detractors with all manner of weird concerns and claims. A social reformer named Charlotte Smith began a crusade against women's cycling in 1896, claiming that cycling was indecent and vulgar, and that bicycling by young women has helped to swell the ranks of reckless girls who finally drift into the standing army of outcast women of the United States. The bicycle is the devil's advance agent morally and physically in thousands of instances. Smith herself is a complicated figure. She spent much of her energy fighting a useless battle against women on bikes, but she was also a staunch advocate for working women and did a lot of good in that realm. She was also famous for smashing her umbrellas over the head of any man she saw annoying a woman, and she guessed that she probably destroyed at least 5,000 umbrellas in her lifetime doing this, which I love. But Smith wasn't alone in her hatred of women cycling. There were numerous articles, such as one titled "Should Women Cycle? A Medical View of the Question," which claimed, "Ladies must remember that they belong to a sex which for centuries has not been accustomed to prolonged exercise in the open air, and therefore must act with that discretion and caution which would often be quite unnecessary on a man's part." As if, you know, working women didn't and never existed? Women who worked out in fields on farms? Alright. But cycling was further proving not only to be safe socially, but also extremely good for the health of riders. Ellen B. Parkhurst, the wife of a New York minister, wrote in the Evening Times, "A girl who rides a wheel is lifted out of herself and her surroundings. She is made to breathe pure air, see fresher and more beautiful scenes, and get an amount of exercise she would not otherwise get. All this is highly beneficial. The 1890s was a period of time where people were becoming increasingly concerned with their health and the opinion of medical professionals. In fact, the word of doctors was so powerful that it often was used as a marketing tool for better or for worse. In the late 1870s and early 1880s, Albert Pope, the owner of Columbia High Wheeler Bicycles, ran an extremely effective marketing campaign for his bikes aimed at empowering the love of cycling in the US at large by distributing cycling books and pamphlets and, most importantly, awarded prizes to doctors who wrote effective articles touting the health benefits of riding bikes. And though doctors often made wild claims about cycling's health benefits, from claiming that it could cure asthma to heart disease, it was undeniable that the cycling craze was doing a lot of good. People reportedly were buying up to 1 million less cigars per day because they were too busy biking to smoke, and Chicago saw a sharp drop in morphine use because people found that long bike rides helped them to sleep better than the drug could. Not all doctors could agree on how women factored in, though. As we went over earlier, physical exertion was an extremely concerning subject for most people, worrying that the motion of the body would damage people's ability to reproduce, and the bike seat would alter the placement of the bones or pelvic organs, as if anyone with a uterus is, made of Play-Doh or something. As if people pushing out numerous babies in their lifetime, a thing that does shift organs around and could harm muscles and bones, is really no issue, because then the body is doing its social job. But as soon as these people are exercising, doing something they enjoy, what about the internal organs? One physician claimed, cycling renders women awkward in their walk. They gradually come to move with a plunging kind of motion, the reverse of graceful, and frequently cultivate weakness of back, which makes them hold themselves badly. The good news is, Physical Education magazine, which quoted this physician, had some choice words to say in response. To this we say in the name of the prophet, fudge. The above anonymous celebrity utters an opinion which is dogmatic, destructive, and audacious. Many people did outspokenly object to the idea that cycling was harmful to women, but the fear of women gaining more independence and abandoning gender roles was still pervasive. But that's really the crux of the issue here. These people viewed women as walking baby incubators to be admired for beauty, not brains, and couldn't stand the thought of them having a modicum of independence. And the bicycle afforded women an independence that they had never experienced before. The article Women and the Wheel in Munsey's Magazine, May 1896, wrote, "To men, the bicycle in the beginning was merely a new toy, another machine to be added to the long list of devices that they knew in their work and play. To women, it was a steed upon which they rode into a new world." Even those who supported cycling were only chill with women doing it on certain conditions, and the etiquette influencers of the time had a lot to say on that front. The Omaha Daily Bee published Don'ts for Women Wheelers in 1895, writing, "Don't be a fright." A fright was when someone causes a bike accident while anxiously trying to avoid having an accident. Don't carry a flask. Don't wear golf hose. Don't faint on the road. Don't wear a man's cap. Don't wear tight garters. Don't stop at roadhouses. Don't forget your tool bag. Don't attempt a century. A century was a continuous 100-mile ride. Don't coast, it is dangerous. Don't say, feel my muscle. Don't criticize people's legs. Don't boast of your long rides. Don't wear loud-hued leggings. Don't wear clothes that don't fit. Don't wear jewelry while on a tour. Don't powder your face on the road. Don't wear rubber-soled cycling shoes. Don't go to church in your bicycle costume. Don't imagine everybody is looking at you. Don't tempt fate by riding too close to the curbstone. Don't ask, what do you think of my bloomers? Don't try to ride in your brother's clothes to see how it feels. Don't overdo things. Let cycling be a recreation, not a labor. Although this list said not to wear cycling clothes to church, many clergymen encouraged people to do just that, even providing bike parking at their churches because it was one of the only ways to encourage people to actually attend services on their only day off. But of course people wanted to wear cycling clothes to church. Cycling clothes were incredible, especially on the women's wear front, because women's clothes had to adapt a lot to the bike to avoid injury. It was all too easy for large skirts to get caught up and tangled in the wheels, throwing a rider overboard. Women's clothing, which functioned just fine as regular day wear and even sportswear, as we saw earlier, was not well suited to cycling. Dress reform began taking steps in the right direction by introducing bifurcated skirts, which looked like normal skirts but were actually really just baggy pants. There were also tools to help hike skirts up, or skirts that could transform from long to short, but the bloomers remained the most contentious subject. People who normally excused women on bikes would draw the line at bloomers because now, by shirking women's clothing gender roles, they were seen as taking steps into man's territory, overstepping their bounds in an attempt to take power away from men. Women wearing bloomers were depicted in illustrations as mannish and unsightly, smoking cigars and standing in powerful stances with short hair and masculine ties. Once again, bigoted art trying to make a dig at masked women and gender nonconforming people backfires and ends up making them look fucking badass. The fact is, though, that men weren't the only ones railing against women in bloomers. Women were against them as well, because as much as we today like to believe that historical women's fashion that we view as oppressive was required by men, in actuality, women were the ones driving and upholding these fashion ideals too. In a time before women had any political power at all, it was one of the few ways that they could exact any influence. So the bloomer suit, though extremely practical and flashy, was nowhere near as popular as wearing bloomers under a skirt or simply wearing a convertible or shortened skirt on its own. While the bloomer suit was useful on a bike, it wasn't acceptable to wear it uncovered by a skirt as soon as you were off the bike, and few women were willing to make social martyrs of themselves for fashion. In response to the dangers of skirts being caught in wheels, bike manufacturers attempted to modify bike designs with guards covering the back wheel and removing the chains. That said, the bloomers were widespread enough to become a staple of thousands of illustrations and sewing patterns, songs, and cartoons. It was said, perhaps exaggeratedly, that in Paris, the divided bicycle dress was so common that nobody batted an eye at a woman in bloomers. Overall, though, its infamy was more due to its controversy rather than its influence on mainstream fashion of the time, and you really can't blame women for not wanting to attract too much ire or ridicule. Social pressure is a hell of a boss fight. Even so, the 1880s and 90s saw the rise of a number of award-winning female athletes who took on the cycling races. Racers like Louise Armando, who was also a legendary strongwoman, Elsa von Blumen, Frankie Nelson, and Lily Williams all competed so well against other women, men, and even horses that they challenged the commonly held belief that women could never surpass the physical strength and talent of men. Over and over, racing women would break records or go flying in unbelievable bike accidents during races, only to get right back up and continue racing for hours on end, all while ill or injured, and in corsets. So much for fragility. And in the mid-1890s, Annie Cohen-Kopchowski took on the challenge of a bet from two men and succeeded in biking around the world. Annie was in good long-distance company. In 1896, Donna Reinhardt biked 17,196 miles in 1 year. The Cycling West magazine dubbed her Denver's petite but Herculean mistress of the road. And these women were performing these incredible feats all in several yards of fabric and a corset. Now, I'm no racer. I'm not athletic in the slightest, but I do enjoy biking, and I wanted to test out for myself what it would have felt like for these women to be on a bike wearing what they wore. There's a pervasive belief that their clothes, and more particularly their corsets, would prevent women from being able to properly exercise or move or breathe. People think that corsets constricted your body so much that you couldn't breathe, but they didn't. We've seen now just how popular sports and cycling were for women. How could they do all of this without breathing or being able to move? Other YouTubers who tackle historical fashion have addressed this subject with their own experiments. Elin Abrahamson tried out running long distances in 18th century stays in this video, Gracie Patton went roller skating in stays here, Snappy Dragon did a video on circuit training in corsets, and Bernadette Banner tested out basic exercises in a corset in this video. And on the cycling front, Constance Mackenzie and Lady Lilith Design have both made great videos about cycling in corsets. But now it's my turn. So I got dressed in an 1890s style cycling bloomer suit, corset and all. Yes, my corset is actually more Edwardian / turn of the century, but it's fine. It's fine. As you can see, my corset has a lot of room at the hips, and this is so that I can put padding under there for a more exaggerated hourglass shape if I want to. I also was wearing modern bike shorts and a tank top underneath because I had to be somewhere in regular clothes after this. I also don't have the right shirt yet, but you know what? If it gets the job done, then I'm cool with that. And what's this? I can bend down and put on my shoes just fine in a corset? We're off to a good start. So here I am in turn-of-the-century clothes in public on a bike, and you know what? It was totally fine. I was convinced that I would struggle because I'm super out of shape, but it really wasn't that bad, and to be honest, I totally forgot that I was wearing the corset. I could breathe just fine, it didn't hurt. The key here is the fact that my corset fits me very well and is comfortable because it was tailored to my measurements. If you're wearing an ill-fitting corset, no, you're not gonna be having a good time. And no, I didn't tight lace it either because there's no reason to. Corset wearers back then were typically not tight lacing either, especially not while doing anything active. Now my corset is a regular corset, but sports corsets did exist, and though I don't have one, I'm curious as to whether it may have felt different. What I was noticing was how uncomfortable my modern exercise shorts were underneath all of this. They were just not staying put, if you know what I mean. But basically, my takeaway was really thinking about how easy it was, especially in the bloomers, and thinking about how freeing it must have felt for women at the time. And it was. It was many years of incremental successes before women were allowed to join the Olympics. Baron Pierre de Coubertin proposed reviving the Olympics in the 1890s and had some choice words about women's involvement. Women have but one task, that of crowning the winner with garlands. And later, women have probably proved that they are up to par with almost all the exploits to which men are accustomed, but they have not been able to establish that in doing so they have remained faithful to the necessary conditions of their existence and obedient to the laws of nature. Okay. 12 women were allowed to enter the second Olympics in 1900 against Coubertin's wishes, apparently completely by accident due to the haphazard organization of the event. One of them was golf champion Margaret Abbott, who technically won a gold medal but was insultingly awarded a porcelain bowl instead. Despite the strict rules requiring them to dress in long skirts, corsets, and all, these women competed with everything that they had, often outperforming the men. One Frenchman in the audience wrote to her friend, "Brace yourself, my friend, women have participated in these games. Our sportswomen were clad in white, elegant, pretty, and the racket they held in their hands did not just caress the ball. Their ardor and their endurance have astonished me." Things improved by the 1908 Olympics, where 36 women were allowed to compete in tennis, figure skating, and archery. And lady gymnasts and swimmers were allowed by 1912, by which point the sportswear now allowed bare legs below the knee and short sleeves. Certainly, things changed dramatically in the first several years of the 20th century. But the thing is, women managed to enjoy and excel at sports no matter what they were wearing. When they managed to enter the sporting spheres, they often surpassed the men with none of the same advantages, corsets and petticoats or not. It's easy to see how this may have bruised a few egos. The same holds true today. To be honest, a great deal of these struggles in the sporting world haven't changed much. Women's sports are still viewed as less important and unworthy of equal pay. Women are still often required to wear certain clothes based on arbitrary sports rules that men make up. Trans athletes face unique challenges as they are prohibited from playing on the teams that correspond with their gender, and transphobia affects both trans and cis athletes, disproportionately affecting women of color as they are often viewed as inherently more masculine and subjected to tests, checks, and prohibitions not applied to their white peers. You may remember the incident from 2009 when South African runner Caster Semenya won an IAAF World Championship 800-meter race, and the IAAF made a statement that they believed that Semenya didn't meet the requirements to compete as a woman, and asked her to sit out of the competition without explanation. In the meantime, the media went wild, picking apart every masculine part of her appearance to claim that she must secretly be a man. It just shows how little progress has been made since the 1960s, when the IAAF would subject women to chromosome tests and were given laminated laminated certificate of femininity licenses they had to carry around with them at competitions and submit to prove their femaleness. This humiliating test, which relied on the bullshit idea that chromosomes equal biological sex, hint, they do not, quickly proved itself to be trash when Polish sprinter Ewa Klobukowska, literally a cis woman, failed the chromosome test due to a chromosomal condition that she never knew she had. At age 21, all of her medals were taken away. The chromosomal model of understanding sex and gender we now know is wholly inaccurate. Many people are born with more or less than 46 chromosomes, or have an extra X chromosome, or have a chromosome that's hard to pin down as which one it is. Why is it such a terrible thing to accept that biology itself is a spectrum, and that's totally okay? I promise you, the world is not gonna fall apart for that reason. There are plenty of real ones to worry about. This outdated idea of binary chromosomal biology, unsupported by scientific facts, reinforces the false idea that all cis men and cis women are biologically one way by nature, and that women are nothing but weak-bodied baby incubators, and trans people don't exist, and intersex people are flukes to be fixed, and men are nothing but emotionless macho Tonka trucks. Bioessentialism hurts you too, cis men. Not only are these beliefs just not true, but it leaves every trans, non-binary, and intersex person by the wayside, not to mention women of color. And in the end, whether you believe it or not, whether or not you care, it affects all of us. Wow. That was kind of a somber note to end on, wasn't it? Sorry about that. It's a habit I have. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. I'm glad you could join me today on this exploration of women's sports of yesteryear. So, wash thy hands, wear thy mask, and get outside for some fresh air to prevent hysteria.